Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up, you're already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am pleased to present a good friend of mine, part-time fellow Nashvilleian, and an expert in the field of risk management and insurance for live events. And given what happened to Bonnaroo recently, there's a lot for us to explore here. And as usual, I promise you guys will leave here smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I'm a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Tempkins ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. And in this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And please ask questions of us. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. And also, this is very important. Please make sure your setting of your chat is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not do this for free. Special thanks to MedJet, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Tennessee Brew Works, and Better Than Booze. So let's get down to business. Today we welcome Peter Tempkins. Peter has over 30 years of experience in providing insurance placement and risk management services for all aspects of the music industry, namely concert tours, festivals, venues, promoters, clubs, and music industry vendors. His festival clients include Bonnaroo, the Warped Tour, Outside Lands, and Forecastle Music Festival, and he is the broker of choice for notable bands including AC/DC, Metallica, and Arcade Fire, and works with promoters such as AC Entertainment and Square Peg Concerts. Peter has spoken on dozens of panels and roundtables for the likes of Billboard, New York State Bar Association, CLE, IAAM, Performance Magazine, Polestar, and TourLink. He's a results-oriented professional who combines his experience, insurance savvy, and client focus to develop world-class insurance solutions. Performance Magazine has recognized him as Insurance Agent of the Year 7 different times. It is my pleasure to welcome my friend Peter here today. Welcome, brother.
Good afternoon, Tom. You forgot the most important word about me now.
Yeah.
Retired.
I knew that. And as I was reading that, I'm going, this sounds a little bit out of date. But the honest truth is that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on today, because I knew since you were retired, you could speak freely without the burden of, say, getting any of your current clients in trouble. So you're going to, I know, not provide anything that's going to get anybody in trouble today.
Right. Let me say one thing before we start, Tom, and I'm sure you're going to get to it, but I'd rather get to it. I am not anybody's broker. I have no dogs in any fight, any claim, anything going on. B, I'm not consulting to anybody. So again, no dogs in the fight. I have no inside knowledge on anything going on right now. Pretty much in the entire industry. I do have people who are talking to me, but none of it is confidential information.
Amen. And I appreciate
and I'm going to talk in generalizations. So if I happen to say the Pitch Festival, because I'm reading it over your shoulder, I just made up the name of that festival. If there happens to be a real festival that by that name, it's just a coincidence. Right. I'm not going to talk about any real numbers, any real events that I'm involved in or I have secret knowledge of.
Well, I appreciate every bit of that, and I'm not going to get us in trouble. I still make my living actively in the music industry, and the last thing I want to do is piss off any of my clients too. But the real reason I wanted you to come on board here today is everybody who knows anything about me understands my own passion for live music and specifically big festivals and most importantly Bonnaroo. Bonnaroo is one of my happy places. I've been to I think 17 of the 22 that they've attempted to have over the last 25 years. It's one of my happy places, and I was torn up with it getting rained out last week or 2 weeks ago now, and I specifically had a lot of people coming to me asking me questions on how does that happen? How do they make decisions about what to cancel, when to cancel, so forth and so on? I'm like, I don't know, but I know people that do. And so I was so pleased that you would accept my invitation to come on here today, and talk a little bit about the generalities confronting these issues in the live music space. Before we get started, tell me, tell our listeners your story. You spent 30 years in this business. Why don't you give us your elevator pitch real quick?
Well, actually, it was 35 years before I retired. Um, the first festivals I was involved in, believe it or not, were Warped, the Lilith Festival, and the Horde Festival. And as I get to joke on Warped, not counting this year, I'm one of three or four people that were involved the entire 25 years. Um, I still talk to Kevin on a regular basis.
I was so
Um,
glad that he brought it back this year. Sounds like it was very successful too.
yep, I'm going to try to get out to one of the three dates if I'm around.
Hmm.
But that was my first foray into festivals. Um, and I started picking up bands early in my career. I picked up some venues later in my career, promoters, probably in about, year 4 or 5 of my career. I specialized in live entertainment. I did not get involved in theater, film, TV, dry cleaners, anything like that. I stayed in live music. It was very easy for me and very comfortable for me.
How'd you get into it? What led you there in the first place?
Um, Funny story. My stepfather, who's no longer with us, was a business manager, and the gentleman he was doing his insurance with had an idea on how he wanted to grow his business. And he and I ended up talking. He lived in Michigan at the time. I lived in New York at the time. And he was in New Jersey for one of his clients doing a series of shows at Giant Stadium. And we were having dinner. And I won't say the name of a band, but I will say it was from Ireland. They still are. And in the middle of the dinner, while we were chatting to each other, their manager came over and asked some questions, and I answered. And the gentleman who was interviewing me said, "How did you know those answers? You've never sold insurance." And I said, "It's easy, it's common sense."
Ha,
And he hired me, and I started, and it took off from there.
was that manager by chance a guy named Paul McGinnis?
I will not deny that.
Ha, wow.
Um,
I never knew that story about you. Very
yeah,
cool. So how old were
um,
you then?
33.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, hey, listeners, take a look at that. Here's a guy who entered the business at 33. Everyone thinks if you don't get started when you're 22 that you'll never make it. Good on you, man. I love
yeah.
that. So for 35 years, you essentially advised festival promoters, concert promoters, tours, and such on risk management and insurance, right?
For the most part, yep. And not only in the States, but a lot of the bands we worked with went overseas, and I had to get involved in a lot of their overseas. So not only did I have to know a lot of the rules for the 50 states, I had to know rules for foreign countries.
That's right.
Early in my career, the gentleman I worked for he was the broker for the Amnesty International tour. Um, but I ended up working that a lot and going out to a bunch of the dates. In
Hmm.
fact, funny side story on that is my wife, who you've met and some of the listeners have met. She's from what used to be called Rhodesia. now called Zimbabwe. And when the Amnesty tour heard I was going to Zimbabwe, they hadn't decided where they were going to play. They were thinking about Zimbabwe. They asked me to advance the stadium, but I couldn't tell them why. So, being the good insurance broker that I am, I kind of made up a story, and we got in, and I got to check out the stadium, found out a lot about it, came back after our honeymoon, and 3 weeks later, they announced they were going to Zimbabwe.
How about that?
And that's early in my career.
So, I guess my first high level question is what kind of insurance can a festival operator purchase? What are all the various things they can insure against?
Okay, well, let's start with easy to the hardest. General liability, um, business auto, which will cover either owned or rented or leased vehicles, um, workers' compensation, unless they're using a payroll service to cover all their employees. Otherwise, they have to get a workers' comp policy. Obviously, property for all the equipment that they're renting. Uh, Disclaimer, unless they can get that responsibility off their plate by contract and make the vendor responsible for it. An umbrella policy, which gives them extra coverage for liability and workers' comp, and then cancellation/ non-appearance. Most festivals key in on cancellation coverage. Um,
And what exactly is that?
I'm giving a real short version. If the event is canceled beyond the control of the insured,
Okay.
that would be what the policy covers. All right. So if the ABC Festival, named for the three people, A, B, and C, and A wakes up one morning and says, I want to go play golf, cancel the festival. That's not covered. That's within their control. All right. Again, I like using weird examples because I don't wish ill on anybody. A meteor hits the site 2 days before the festival starts. No people are on site, but the site is severely damaged. That's a real reason to cancel the event. It's beyond their control.
That's what happened to Bonnaroo in 2021.
It wasn't a meteor, but yep.
Yep. A
Uh,
meteor-like event a la floods, rain,
right,
hurricane. So what
right.
happens in that instance?
Well, without, and there are certain exclusions that may or may not be on policies. So, for purposes of what you and I are discussing, we're going to pretend there are no extra exclusions. There were certain cast in stone exclusions. All right. Now, if it rains a little bit, that's not reason to cancel. If there's lightning, that's unsafe for the public. If the site is flooded out, um, and they can't remediate it, then that's a reason for cancellation. We had an example, and I can talk about it because it's public. I did the fish festival at Watkins Glen.
Which year?
Uh, I don't know, like 4 years ago,
Magnaball.
Magnaball.
Yeah. Oh
And
man.
all right, they had a lot of rain,
Phew.
but we were actually in the process of remediating it to the point of we had gotten the insurance companies to authorize the expense to bring in helicopters to blow the water off, which is something that the PGA does for a lot of events. It was only after two very long, large phone calls, group calls, that the decision was made to cancel because the city of Watkins Glen, that delivers the water to the racetrack, put a water boil notice. So you couldn't drink the water supply, and there was no way to get temporary potable water in a large enough quantity. Um, they had spoken to major companies that are in the beverage industry, and they said, we can get you all the water you want on Sunday.
Ah,
And there was a county commissioner who said, can't you get bottled water? And we said, no, there's no way to get 400,000 bottles of bottled water today. And then there's no way to deliver it around the site. So ultimately, the decision was made to cancel that. If you remember several years ago, Outside Lands, as we were coming out of COVID, they moved the event to October, um, just like they moved Bonnaroo to October or September.
yep.
There was
Labor
so
Day.
much rain several days prior to the event that where the third stage would have gone, it was probably under a foot and a half or 2 feet of water. The team for Outside Lands, in conjunction with myself and the insurance companies and a bunch of vendors, made the decision we're going to move forward. And they brought in pumps, and I'll joke and say sponges and mops and straws. And 2 days later, they put the stage in there. They dried the land out. So why they had extra expense, which the insurance company paid for, they didn't cancel the event.
Show must go on.
Right. Um, so there were different reasons to cancel the event. Um,
So,
Obviously, a hurricane, tornado, things of that nature.
the fish example is an interesting one. That's their own festival. And by the way, I misspoke earlier. That was not Magna Ball, that was Curveball.
Right. Thank you. You're right. It was curveball.
Magna Ball was one of the greatest fish festivals of many fish festivals. So in their instance, I mean, they're canceling their own event. That doesn't have anywhere near the implications of, say, a Bonnaroo last week, where they had, 200 bands on the bill and so many other ripple effects of making the decision to cancel. Um, I'm curious about who gets impacted. So, in other words, if you can look in your crystal ball and think about Bonnaroo and what they were dealing with 2 weeks ago, first off, they're thinking safety of the patrons and the everybody that's there, whether they're working there, they're there as a fan. That's got to be number one, right?
Yep.
And that's a hard stop. I mean, in other words, it starts and stops with that. But beyond that, what are some of the things that they're thinking and that they've got to confront in the decision to cancel or carry on?
Well, they have to look at the reason for the cancellation. All right. And again, we're generalizing, we're talking in very broad strokes. You know, to stop an event short term or stop an event long term, when you cut through everything, is it safe for the people who are going to be there? If you go to a festival and it rains a little bit and you get wet, sorry, that's not a reason for a cancellation.
I've been rained on at Bonnaroo many times.
Right. There's a little bit of mud. Okay, what's the joke? They cancel Glastonbury if there is no mud, because people expect that. Now, most festivals use what I call a legitimate weather reporting service. It's not lick your finger, stick it in the air, look at the sky, and go, I think. There are companies, and I know C3 uses one, that they not only monitor the weather in and around the festival area, they're tracking it, much, much wider. So whoever Bonnaroo was using, and we're talking about Bonnaroo, I will bet you they knew the weather over Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas and all of those states. And they were watching what was coming. All
Yep.
right. Obviously, they're not watching Alaska because it doesn't matter. They're not watching Maine because unless it's coming north to south, which very rarely it does, are they going to worry about weather in that direction?
Right.
Um, you know, now obviously you get pop-up storms, and that you have to deal with when they happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because what you have to remember is, rain, you get wet. And if it rains on top of you and you don't have an umbrella and you're outside, you're going to get wet. Lightning can travel 8 miles. So, you told me where you live, where I live. There could be lightning over the Nashville airport. It could hit us.
Right.
So they have to keep track of not only the weather, but the winds and the lightning. Um,
So
and
in Bonnaroo's case, they use the National Weather Service. Is that one of the reputable, outfits that you're talking about? They're
the
not a.
pro, again, no inside knowledge,
Mhm.
but I would believe Bonnaroo used more than the National Weather Service. As I say, I know who Bonnaroo used to use. I know some of the people that C3 has used over the years, but I can't tell you what they did this year.
Right. Yeah.
But again, the problem with National Weather Service, and I'll use Davidson County as an example. All right. You're doing an event at the southern end of Davidson County, and there's going to be a tornado watch at the very top of Davidson County. National Weather Service will put out a tornado warning for Davidson County. The fact that you're 20 miles, 30 miles away, and they know they can see the way that tornado line is running, it's almost definitely not going to affect you in the South. But the National Weather Service does it by county.
Right.
They don't localize it. They don't say Belmead,
Mhm.
or Bellevue, or Wedgwood, Houston, you know, or downtown Nashville. Um, so that's why I'm saying I don't believe that is what C3 only used.
Sure. So, in addition to the obvious safety, what other implications are they considering? What other factors go into their decision to cancel or carry on?
Um, if they stop the show, can they get it back up and running afterwards? If they're going to make the decision based on a lot of information and they ultimately decide to cancel the entire event, then what they got to worry about is getting everybody out.
Yeesh. And how many
Right,
thousands of cars were already in the campgrounds at Bonnaroo then?
right.
10,000?
But it's not only that, it's doing the job of coordinating, and I'm going to make it simple, the police and any other agencies that are involved in traffic control to get ready to reverse. They're ready for it on Sunday night and Monday morning. But Friday morning, Friday afternoon, they have people coming in, and it's like, hold on, you got to turn the Queen Mary on a dime.
Wow.
So it takes them, I would venture, several hours to get ready to reverse it, because then not only do you need the police, and TDOT and everybody else to get ready to flip it, you have to get your internal people ready to flip the site. And as I say, while they're ready for it, they have a plan. They know, I'm making this up, Sunday night at 6 o'clock, they're going to flip it because no more people are coming in. So they're planning already on Friday and Saturday. Okay, 6 o'clock on Sunday, we're going to start flipping. And how do we do it? Well, now on Friday, they got to decide this in a few hours.
Right.
And not only how to flip them out, but flip them out safely. Now, if there's anybody from C3 Live Nation Bonnaroo on this call, kudos to you guys, because I saw nothing in the press about anybody complaining about it. So kudos to them. And Tom, if you talk to anybody from those companies, give them my tip of the hat and compliments.
I will, because I do talk to them, some of my best friends.
Yeah, I have friends at Live Nation, and I've told them.
So Roland Lundy in the chat here is asking a question. What does it cost to insure festivals like Bonnaroo? Can you reveal a 80,000 person festival, 4 days, not
All right.
called Bonnaroo? Generally speaking, how much are they throwing down to insure that thing?
Okay. Again, I'm going to talk in generalizations. All right. For the general liability policy, you're looking at somewhere between $1 and $3 a head, depending on um, how you do your rating structure. That's on the first million or $2 million of general liability. Workers' comp, if you have to write a policy, it's based off payroll and job function. So somebody who sits in the office at Bonnaroo and they only sit in the office all day, they're clerical. In Tennessee, the rate is, the last time I looked at rates, was about 50 or 60 cents, right around there. If you're a rigger, it could be 10, 15, $20 per 100. So the rates are all over the place, and it's depending on your job. Equipment coverage, stuff they rent, because the stuff they own, they already have covered, so there's a hard number there. Typically, it's about, again, I'm talking in generalizations, it's about 1.5% of the value of the equipment. All
So
right.
all the video, sound,
Right.
staging, rigging,
Right.
all
Now, again,
millions of dollars worth of gear.
unless they or you can negotiate it out of the contract that the vendor is responsible for it.
How often does that happen?
I've seen it happen a few times, but not a lot.
Right.
I've had it more done on the artist side where we've been able to do it. Festival side's a lot more difficult. Hired and non-owned auto is a percentage of your cost of hire. And I forget what the rates are. The other thing that a lot of festivals have had to pick up over the years, years ago, they'd bring in a vendor to do the alcohol sales. And the promoter got no part of the money. And under your general liability policy, you have a coverage that's called host liquor. So you go to a concert, you're sitting backstage, and one of your buddies from Live Nation goes, "Here, Tom, here's a beer." That's host liquor, and that's covered. The minute a promoter or anybody else starts taking money for liquor, it's no longer host liquor, and they need a liquor liability policy. Now, what we did with our festivals is they would bring in a vendor who had $5 or $10 million worth of liquor coverage, and we would get what's called contingent liquor liability. So if for some reason the vendor's liability wasn't enough, or it was defective or whatever, then this policy would kick in to protect the promoter, not the vendor, just the promoter. And again, it's a percentage based on what the actual liquor sales are.
Any other coverages? Was that it?
Yeah. And then you get the cancellation coverage. There we go.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay. There are various ways to write cancellation coverage, but all of them, the premium is based on a percentage. Now, pre-COVID, if you had a really good history, you could get cancellation coverages and some other coverages thrown in for about one and a quarter. And typically we would package for our clients because we knew they wanted it, cancellation coverage, communicable disease, which prior to COVID, nobody really worried about, and terrorism. Now, there's terrorism coverage, and then there's TRIA coverage. TRIA is an acronym passed after 9/11, and it's called the Terrorism Reinsurance Act Authority. I think that's what it is. You have to offer it on every policy. The client is under no obligation to take it, and the rules for it to be invoked are very specific. And it starts with the claim has to be over X number of millions, I forget how much, and it's got to be certified. I always forget which order, please forgive me. The Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and Secretary of the Treasury. One of them has to approve it, and the other two have to stand for, one of them has to start it, and the other two have to approve it. I forget who is which. Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. I saw the question pop up, sorry.
So
So,
you
but
mentioned,
let me finish. But London sold and still says a policy called terrorism, which not only covers terrorism, but threat of terrorism, but you don't need the qualifiers like you need on TRIA. And the last time when I was working, it was a lot cheaper than TRIA. And threat of terrorism would be where the public authorities go to the festival owners or directors or the people in charge and say, we have a credible threat that you're under a threat of a terrorist attack, and we strongly advise you to cancel. And you say to them, great, give it to me in writing. And now, no joke intended, I have a note from mommy, I can cancel. This is not, the stage manager for the third stage of Bonnaroo writing the note and signing it, Epstein's mother.
got it.
Those of us who are old enough to remember that.
There's a few on here that do.
Right. So typically, cancellation coverage is a percentage of your sum insured. Pre-COVID, the way it worked was you either did your expenses or you did your income. If you did your income, it covered your expenses and your profit. But since COVID, and I'm going to have to give a history on Lloyd's. Sorry, because everybody thinks Lloyd's is an insurance company. The analogy I use is Lloyd's is a salad bar, and you go to the main guy at the salad bar and you say, "I want a salad," and he says, "All right, we're going to charge you $10 a pound." And then you go to the lettuce guy And the lettuce guy says, $10 a pound, I'll take 30% of the salad. And then you go to the tomato guy. It's all these different individuals. Lloyd's is the overall, but it's really all these separate insurance companies or syndicates that are signing off on the risk, and you have to go to each broker, each syndicate or market to get their percentage and then to accept the rate and deductible that the lead underwriter gave. So the lead underwriter may say for Bonnaroo, again, I'm making up numbers, I want a 3% rate. I, as the broker, come to you and you go, no, no, no. If you want me to take any part of Bonnaroo, I want 3.5%. And I'll go, Tom, thanks, but let me see what else I can do. Now, if I have to come back to you to take your 3.5, everybody else gets 3.5.
And that's 3.5% of exactly what?
Well, if you of your sum insured. So again, making up numbers. The expenses for Bonnaroo were $40 million. It would be 3% of $40 million.
Got it.
If it was 55,000 of income, it would be 3% of 55 million. Now, since COVID, the market has contracted. So for instance, while Bonnaroo may need 40 million for expenses and 55 for total income, the marketplace may say you can only get $40 million. So then you just cover your expenses and you don't worry about your profit because you can't get any more. Now, what you can do also, which I have a suspicion is what C3 has done because they have so many festivals. Again, I'm making up numbers. For all their festivals, they may need $150 million worth of coverage if they lose all the festivals. They can't get 150. And they say, okay, our biggest exposure, we need 50 million. And the marketplace says, okay, we'll do it at 3%. And if I lose you on my math, let me know, I'll go back over it. The premium would be 3% of the 150 million. But then because they're only taking 50, they would get a discount. So 3% of 150 is what, 5 mil? Did I do that right?
1.5. Yep.
Okay. But if they only need 50 million, instead of the premium being 5 million, it might be 4 million. Now, here's the thought process on that one. Oh, plus there'll be a deductible. Typically, the deductibles are between 1% and 3%. So it'll either
The
be
whole coverage.
it'll be 1% of the 50 million or 3% of the 50 million or some other number. Where it gets interesting is if they only lose one festival and 50 mil is enough, great. They made a smart decision. But if they blew Bonnaroo and they needed that 50 million, and they have to go back to the market to get another 50 million, they're probably going to pay a lot more than the 3% to get the additional. Now, again,
Isn't that just like if you wreck your car, your insurance premium goes up because you're now considered a hazard for the insurance company? Is that the same?
yes, but that's on the renewal. So let's say Bonnaroo happened last weekend, okay, and miraculously, which is unheard of, today the claim is settled. The $50 million is gone, but they have other festivals coming up. I think C3 and Live Nation is smart enough to say we need more coverage. So they're going to tell their broker, go get us another 50 mil. That broker will go back into the marketplace and try to secure another 50 mil tomorrow. And the rate could now be 3.5, 4, 5, whatever. And that's what they would have to pay if they want to get more coverage. Your auto insurance, if a policy renewed today, tomorrow you had a car accident, your premium is not going to go up till a year from yesterday.
Got it. Yeah. This, I've got 1,000 more questions just related to this. So back to the cancellation policy for a second. Do the bands get paid regardless? How does that work?
Again, you're going to hear me say this a lot of times. It goes back to contracts.
Depends.
Right. Years ago, it was kind of iffy if they got paid, they didn't get paid. A lot of times they did get paid. Sometimes there was negotiations. Then for a while, I'll call it the big three promoter festivals, changed it to no play, no pay. So if you were going to play on Saturday afternoon from 3 to 4 and it poured and they shut down the festival from 3 to 4 and you didn't play, you didn't get paid. Then several years ago, they changed it to say if your participation gets canceled, you know, either the day of or within 48 hours of, and you're in the vicinity, if you're in the vicinity and it's 48 hours, you get half the money. If you're on site and you get canceled, you get all your money. So again, it's all by contract. There is no one size fits all. Now,
Right.
I'm sure, I'm going to just talk, again, broad names, Live Nation, because they have various divisions that do festivals, I'm sure all their contracts are the same. AEG, I'm sure all of theirs are the same. Wimmer, Outside Lands, I'll venture a guess. They're all the same. A lot of these smaller festivals, it may be you got to give us 100% guarantee, and if we don't play, we get paid.
Now that seems like heavy duty headliners would have that sort of leverage, but how about a band that's, fifth line down on the bill?
Well, Tom, as you and I were joking yesterday, a band called Susie and the Chrome Suckers. Made up band does not exist. But let's say their agent is CAA. And you're the headliner, and your agent is CAA. CAA is going to negotiate the same contract.
Sure.
Now, they may tweak it a little bit better for the headliner, but they're not going to give somebody else except a lesser than the normal.
Right.
But again, it all comes down to contracts.
So rough and tough. Bonnaroo cancels one day in. They made the decision initially to refund 75% of everybody's tickets, and then they came back a few days later and said 100%. So that money is all going back to the patrons. How much would you imagine Bonnaroo, when the smoke clears and the dust settles here, how much do you think Bonnaroo lost on Bonnaroo? Just pie in the sky.
Well, I have no idea on what the income was. I don't even know if it was sold out. And as second, I certainly don't know any of their expenses. My gut from working with them in the past, and other festivals of that size that I worked on, I would venture a guess their expenses were probably in the 40, near 40 million. Could be a little lower, could be a little higher. So if they're returning all the tickets, well, first of all, if they were sold out, they're already at a loss because they would have made a profit. Because as wonderful as the C's are and Live Nation is, they're not in a charity business.
Yeah.
So they were going to make money. So if they refund all the ticket money, and let's say again, no inside knowledge, it was 55 million in income, and the expenses were 40, they were already negative 15. All right. Why they made the decision, whether on their own or in conjunction with the insurance carriers, to give 100 instead of 75. Um, Either it's a decision that the insurers signed off on for the claim, or Live Nation decided for reputation they would eat that 25%. And again, I have no knowledge.
Right.
Um, but that would be my idea.
Well, good on Bonnaroo and C3 for, I think, over delivering to the fans by giving 100% refund. Frankly, that's magnanimous.
Right.
And I
And I
hope,
can tell you with Curveball, that was probably the easiest decision for the band and management to make. I'm being facetious. I think that one took about 45 seconds.
right.
As I alluded to, there were two phone calls, and I'll use the misnomer. I was the lowest man on the totem pole, which actually, if you do Indian history, low man on the totem pole is actually the most important person. But we had people from the governor's office, the Department of Health, so all these other layers, and I was at the bottom. And it was only 3/4 of the way through the second call where everybody on the call exhausted yeah, you can't get water, that the decision was made to cancel. And then I'm being facetious. I think it took the band and management about 45 seconds.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. Couple of good questions here in the chat I want to address. I know you know Ken Deans. Ken Deans is one of my favorite people in the whole business. He's asking, are the employees included in the per head count?
Absolutely not. Well, put it this way, I have never had a client where it counted. Can't tell you about other brokers and things I'm not involved in, but I never had that.
Ken has the luxury of working in the desert where it never rains. So
Uh-huh.
I
And
know
it's
he's
always
kind
and
of
it's
like,
always a nice, cool 75 degrees, and there's never a traffic problem. Yes, Ken, if you come to Aspen, you can give it to me there.
Kristen Batacon is asking what carriers write these types of policies, the standard insurance companies or their specialized carriers? Well, you used to work for a very specialized carrier.
Well, no, I was a broker.
Okay.
I worked with a lot of different insurance companies. The answer is multiple. Almost all of the event cancellation coverage is written out of London, and some of them are insurance companies and some of them are syndicates. Uh, but almost all of it, there are a couple of American companies that are writing, but they're writing very small amounts. As far as, and again, we're talking in generalizations, you know, because there are certain insurance carriers that won't write certain types of festivals. Like there are some that would write day festivals, and those same carriers won't write a camping festival. There are some carriers that'll write EDM festivals, and there are some that don't. There are probably what I call the main markets, not some outlying markets. There are probably 5 or 6 mainstream carriers, admitted markets, or actually one of them is a non-admitted carrier right now because they haven't been Their paperwork hasn't been admitted by all the states yet, that will write pretty much almost every kind of festival. Again, qualifying, there may be certain genres they won't do, like EDM or camping. Um, those
How
same
about
those same carriers, if they're writing the liability, they'll write the workers' comp, they'll write the auto, and most of them will do umbrellas. And then there are other carriers that will step in and write umbrellas. Property, there are a bunch. Um, but a lot of these carriers with inside that carrier has specialty divisions. So you couldn't go to your local or now they're not writing anymore. Fireman's Fund was, or Allianz was writing music business. You couldn't go to the Fireman's Fund agent in town um, and have him write a festival for you. You had to get to the entertainment market. Um, and yes, I'm talking about long term. Short term, there are some markets that will do it, but a lot of them have um, limitations. It can't be more than X number of people. It can't be overnight. It can't do this. It can't do that.
Alina Johnson's asking the difference between short term and long term? Explain.
Okay. Um, a short term policy you buy just for your event. So let's say you're doing an evening of music supervisors. Did I read that right, Tom?
Yeah, right over
Okay.
there. Yeah.
That's going to be a 2-day event at the Schwimmerhorn here in Nashville. And you need a liability policy for that. So you could buy a short-term policy for that event and that event only. Here's the downside. And so that's short-term. Long-term, most promoters have annual policies. They know their rates, whether it's a festival or a concert, and they're locked in for the year. So if you bought a short-term policy for music supervisors, and then you bought one for the moguls in the making, which is 3 months later, exact same number of people. In fact, the exact people at the Schwimmerhorn, your price could be different. Now, the problem with getting a short-term policy, and I understand the economics, is you didn't wake up tomorrow morning and say, oh, tonight and tomorrow I'm going to do this event. You've been working on this for months. So if you go out for a meeting and you inadvertently injure somebody, you have no coverage. If you had an annual policy, you would have insurance coverage. Now, if you just hold off and punched him in the face, no coverage. But if you tripped and whacked him in the face as you fell, you would have coverage. So short term is not always the smartest move.
But it's the cheapest.
Maybe.
Yeah. Um, George Mayfair is asking a question here, and that is, how active is the insurance company in helping the festival to decide to cancel or not?
Depends on the broker.
If the broker was Peter Tempkins, how active would he be in that discussion?
Well, I have to go back to Magna Ball. Curveball.
Yep.
So I flew into Syracuse and had to drive to Watkins Glen. And I landed at about 2 o'clock. It's what, an hour and a half drive? As I'm in the car driving, I get the call about, can we bring in helicopters? I called my counterpart in London. He called several of the markets. And within a half hour, I had authority to authorize them to bring in the helicopters.
To dry the grounds.
Right. When at the same event, because I was there, I was very much in the loop. Within, I want to say 2 hours, I had an adjuster on site representing the insurance companies. I was very, very proactive.
Yeah.
Um, there are other brokers, from what I hear, not as proactive as me. As an
Mhm.
ex-client said about me, he was talking about his ex-client of mine was talking about his ex-broker and me at the time. He said, the difference is you run towards the fire. He ran away from the fire. But that's me.
Yep. Customer service. So it sounds like in the few minutes we've got left here, it sounds like it's a lot better for the festival operator to cancel before the event starts, i.e., curveball and fish, versus Bonnaroo, unfortunately, one day in.
Again, I don't know how Bonnaroo came to that decision ultimately and when they started all the conversations. I can tell you on curveball, the gates had already opened. We were bringing in the helicopters to dry out some of the fields that needed to be dried out. Production, band, everybody else, um, they felt they could have pulled the building, the show off. Once the water boiled, the water was not drinkable. That's when we had to make decisions quickly.
Yeah, no other choice.
So they couldn't make that decision 2 days before going, well, all this rain, maybe their filters can, but no, you have to wait. Um, and that's why, London, who writes the cancellation coverage, I don't mean to sound crass. Their concern is not liability coverage. Their concern is canceling this event. And, if 3 days out it rains, but the next 5 days look absolutely clear, you can't cancel because on Wednesday it rained. You know. Now, I had an event years ago in Atlanta where it did rain prior to, and we had the weather charts and the reports for the next 4 days. And the promoter had a window of about 2 hours where they could cancel and get out of a lot of expenses. A lot of phone calls back and forth to Europe. And ultimately, the decision came back, cancel. Turned out it was the right decision.
Right.
But you got to work hand in hand with them.
So most of the conversation we've had has really involved the bands and the fans and the owners. How about like sponsors and vendors?
Well, sponsors, again, it goes back to their contracts. What does the contract say about refunds? A lot of the festivals I was involved in, there was language built into the contract. Remember also, if you were a sponsor at Bonnaroo and you were going to be doing your podcast or whatever down there Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but they had been advertising you for 6 months ahead of time or 5 months ahead of time, you got a certain bang for your buck. So again, depending on what the contract says, I can argue you shouldn't get 100%. Maybe you should just get 80% because you did get some benefit.
That's a negotiation.
Right. Um, Vendors, you're talking Production vendors, sound light, staging, porta potties, generators, yada, yada, yada. Again, it depends on what their contract says. Because again, remember, regardless, their equipment is still going to be there, you know? Um,
Would you say, and this is a general question, are those vendors sophisticated enough to think this through to say, hey, we should probably insure ourselves just in case, over and above whatever Bonnaroo insures themselves for?
well, they always have that option to buy a cancellation policy. Now, again, I'm making up numbers. Ken Dean Productions, which is because I'm picking on Ken, is the lighting company for Bonnaroo. And he's going to get paid $1 million. Don't go spend it yet, Ken. Um, and his contract says if Bonnaroo gets canceled, he gets 75% of his money. And Ken came to me and said, Peter, what do I do? I said, well, you have two options. You could be happy with $750,000, or we could get you a cancellation policy for $250,000 to cover what you wouldn't get paid. And I guess, Tom, one of the things I should have said earlier is Insurance 101. For those of you who don't know, Insurance 101, the purpose of insurance is to put you back in the position you should have been in had the claim not happened. So in the example with Ken, he would have gotten $1 million.
So what would that 250K coverage have cost him? Just ballpark.
Well,
10,000?
probably the same as what Bonnaroo was paying, 3%. I'm not doing that math in my head. And Ken may say, yeah, great.
7,500.
Right. Yeah, let's great. Let's do it. Or, you know what? I can live with the 750.
Yeah.
All right. Because remember, even when they canceled Bonnaroo on Friday, everything on site didn't disappear. The stage was still there. The rented stages were still there. The generators were still there. Everything they brought in was still there. So those vendors should be entitled to their rent money.
How about the pizza vendors or the I'm thinking about these poor people who make so much money on an event like that. They buy a gazillion, enough to make a gazillion pizzas, and it's perishable. I mean, they're screwed. What happens there?
Well, if they can't hold it to the next, a lot of these people work a circuit of festivals.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they're at Bonnaroo this weekend. I'm making it up. They're at Forecastle next weekend, and they're at whatever the weekend after. So they spend the whole summer festival to festival to festival. The Wandering Gypsies, there you go. So where they may not be able to use the stuff for the pizza at Bonnaroo, maybe they can use it at Forecastle. I'm not a food expert. I'm not a pizza expert. So, but go on that assumption. Most of them have no coverage. I can tell you when I was working, it was a real pain to get them to get liability insurance. And we had made it really simple. It was basically an online program. And we gave them step by step, and even then it was trouble.
Right.
Um, so most of those people don't have any sort of coverage, and they just move on.
Wow. Well,
But
listen,
again, theoretically, they could have pulled out of Bonnaroo, Friday night and set up downtown Murfreesboro Saturday and Sunday.
right. Well, listen, I could hit you with more and more scenarios here. I appreciate your time. Out of respect for your time and the audience's time, I'm going to go ahead and cut it off. And I just want to summarize again by saying that I think Bonnaroo did the right thing. I think they had no choice but to do what the right thing. And the fact that they've refunded 100% of the ticket purchases is good on them. That's amazing. Um, I I hope Bonnaroo comes back bigger, better, and stronger than ever before next year. Michael Rapino, if you're listening, please take heed.
Yeah. And Tom, if people want to email me questions, you know, please, can I give out my email address?
Yeah, here I'll type
And
it
I
in.
want to use the other one.
What is it?
Peter.Tempkins@Comcast.net.
I'm writing this in the chat, folks. Peter.Tempkins@Comcast.net.
Yep. And I'll be more than happy to answer questions.
Well, I appreciate it. I really do. Can't wait to see you in Aspen. And in the meantime, I hope you get out to Colorado to get where it's cooler than it is here in the sweat box of Nashville.
Heading out tomorrow morning.
Good. Well, be safe to the
You
audience.
got it. Thank you, everybody.
Later.